Okay, so good afternoon once again, and thank you very much for coming back. So, as mentioned by Sir Pardon, hope you had a refreshing and recharging lunch break. So, we discussed this morning the basic business model of banks and how the bank's balance sheet could be used to understand the various risks being encountered by the business and where market risk emanates. Actually, in our discussion, we discovered that market risk emanates both from the asset side as well as the liability side. We have two principal areas of concern. We have your banking books, where you have your loans and deposits and all other non-treasury, non-trading related activities. And you have your trading books, where the treasury traded market risk reside, and where principally all market risk is consolidated, managed, and monitored. We also touched upon the risk management framework, where we focus on discussing the steps, identifying, measuring, controlling, and monitoring risks and how it applies to market risk. We touched upon identification of market risk, interest rate, foreign exchange, equity prices, and commodity prices are some of the sources of market risk depending on the nature of the business, products, and transactions being run by the bank. And we also looked at measurement approaches to market risk, where we focus on net open positions, sensitivity analysis figures such as duration, and value at risk. So for the rest of this afternoon, we will finish the second half of the risk management process, particularly on controlling and monitoring. When it comes to controlling market risk and risk in general, basically we discuss about the decisions to make. Are we going to simply accept the risk, outright avoid it, mitigate it, or transfer? And here, this is where we evaluate after understanding the bank's overall objectives and goals, the nature of the products, services, transactions, and balances that we have in our books. And then we identify what's the best possible prudent response and approach to controlling those levels of market risk. In general, there are different types of one of the ways rather of managing market risk in terms of controlling is setting limits or thresholds in terms of our the extent of how much market risk we are willing to have in our books. One adage in business is that you cannot manage what you don't measure. So it's important that after identifying market risk, we then understand how we measure them, and then that's the time we are able to set parameters on how to limit and control them as we go along. Market risk limits could be at the exposure level, wherein we determine that based on particular types of instruments that we have permitted the bank or the treasury department to have in their portfolio of products, they are only allowed to load up on certain positions to the extent that their exposure limits allow. Another way to manage market risk is through cut loss or stop loss limits, wherein certain thresholds are used to force the position's exit so that any further additional losses may be avoided. And also, when we use value at risk in terms of measurement approaches, we can likewise use them to set limits to what extent we are willing to absorb in terms of market risk in our records. So with exposure limits can be broken down depending on the structure of the treasury unit of the bank. A hierarchy of market risk limits, you can see here, is split throughout this hypothetical trading unit. A risk metric is selected, for example, exposure limit, even value at risk, or some other measure. We select and choose it for implementation. Then risk limits are specified for the overall portfolio, for the overall unit, then split across different desks and departments. So in this image, the size of the cylinder or the height of the cylinder tells you the limit in terms of absolute value, while the percentage of utilization is represented by the areas covered in white. As mentioned, the limits could be based on notional amounts or face values. So it could be in terms of the amount of notionals it can take on in terms of interest rate or foreign exchange. It could also be based on duration or convexity, or in other in foreign currency, delta and gamma. Duration is for fixed income as delta is to foreign exchange. Convexity is for fixed income as gamma is for foreign exchange, at least in the foreign exchange or for options. You use additional limits. For example, we can only have as much duration percentage in terms of interest rate risk, or foreign exchange risk for that matter, for delta and gamma. We can add further limits when it comes to other Greeks or other market risk matrices, such as Vega, or measurement of changes to volatility. You have theta, or time value. Rho, I think, is for change in baseline interest rates on the option products. So there are a lot of market risk limits that we can set depending on the measurement tools that we have set in the earlier process. So it's counterintuitive to have a limit set up for a certain market risk metrics that we did not initially agree upon to be measured to begin with. And in practice, especially during my time with a foreign bank, ito yung the things that you need to discuss and negotiate with the front office, because in the mandate of the front office is to generate as much revenue, and the higher the risk, the higher the return. That would mean introducing a higher level of risk in the bank's records. And our role as market risk professionals is to timely, accurately, and appropriately measure all those market risk and set limits or boundaries for which anything beyond that will already expose the bank to a higher than acceptable measure of risk. In this particular illustration, limits can be partitioned. It's not additive in the sense that if you add a total, it doesn't automatically mean that that's the total is the aggregate point of view, because of the effects of, or possibly the effects of diversification and or offsetting. In practice, the way I would see some or learn from traders, they would usually go above limit so long as there are exception approvals and there are mitigating approaches. For example, okay, I will be higher than my desk limit for about 5 days because of a certain extraordinary event or opportunistic situation. I have the sign of the treasury head. The risk management units are also informed. If and when this goes sideways, then we have certain actions in place that we will take to immediately exit the position, yada, 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 yada. So those control measures are likewise should be encapsulated in the desks and in the risk management's process, policies, and procedures. Those are usually your guidelines as to and your reference points when it comes to setting up limits and control measures dealing with the front office who is managing and generating market risk. Speaking of cut loss limits, so cut loss limits are set in order to provide us a demarcation line wherein this is only the amount of pain that we can absorb. For example, if it's a position that's generating a loss ahead of time, and this is the trigger point wherein if we reach that level, then the trader is expected to exit or transfer the risk to limit the amount of bleeding, so to speak, the amount of losses that will eventually impact the books if and when it gets crystallized. Because without the cut loss limit, without selling it at that point, then the bank may be exposed or may end up assuming and absorbing supposedly avoidable or avoided losses. Now, question, what if can the trader ignore the limit? The answer is no, because market risk mechanism should come into place to force a trader to at least explain. Now, we can override the limit, but market risk processes must have that mechanism in place. Hindi pwedeng hindi, konti na lang, magre-reverse yung market. Huwag kang mag-alala, magre-reverse yung market eventually. Huwag muna natin ibenta. Huwag muna natin i-realize yung loss. The trader may be right, but it's also akin to gambling. We've heard stories of people who say, hindi, yung talo ko, mababawi ko. Next round, mananalo ko niyan. Mababawi ko yung talo. So, that type of mindset only plugs the gambler further down and into debt. And we don't want the same mentality for our traders who are likewise putting the deposit money at risk at some point. So the cut loss limit is a pragmatic and practical way of putting a cap as to what extent we can lose in terms of our funds. I think, I'm not quite sure it's a Silicon Valley Bank case. If they were triggered as well with the cut loss limit. But one thing that exacerbated their situation was their mishandling of communication, wherein they are already suffering fair value losses on their fixed income books. And because of certain transactions requiring them to generate or raise liquidity, they have to sell a portion of those bonds. And that resulted to them capturing that fair value loss into a realized loss in their books. What made the situation tricky for them is that those bonds were categorized as held to maturity, classified as amortized cost in their accounting records. And since amortized cost, the fair value is not shown in the balance sheet, when they all of a sudden have to sell them, then the fair value all of a sudden, the fair value loss all of a sudden becomes part of the balance sheet because of the transaction. And that event plus the poor communication coming from the bank resulted to people, the depositors, who are mostly startups and large deposit balance holders. They decided, I think this bank is going down. So they pulled out their money. And because of the large withdrawals, that again forced the bank to raise liquidity, again forcing them to liquidate more of their bonds, realizing more of their losses. And it became a vicious cycle that resulted to them entering receivership. For value at risk based limits, we look at the threshold, or we refer to the amount of the risk appetite of the bank in general, and the risk tolerance and the levels or capacity of the bank. Risk appetite is a very, generically speaking, it's the amount of levels of risk the bank is willing to absorb in the pursuit of their corporate objectives. Risk tolerance is more on a sub-level of risk appetite, wherein we tolerate certain types of risk and certain levels of risk. So it's one layer lower than risk appetite. And risk limits are the quantification of those risk tolerance definition. Within your respective bank's risk appetite, tolerance, and limits may have their corresponding definitions, but overall, we define them as the threshold wherein we can only absorb so much risk. Risk capacity is in terms of the ability to absorb future losses. It doesn't necessarily mean that if we can absorb 100 million pesos worth of losses, that is also the appetite of the bank. Remember, the capital of the bank is only so much, and the rest of the funding comes from depositors. And therefore, the amount of risk that we put in place should be commensurate with the bank's ability to take action if any of those risks increase through unacceptable levels. For value at risk based limits, we look at again which approach to value at risk was selected, and then based on set parameters, probably RAG thresholds, when say RAG, red, amber, green. We can use the amber threshold as an early warning indicator, while the red is your hard limit, wherein anything breaching that would only be handled as a breach event. In this case, using value at risk limits, if, for example, in this particular instance, $128,000 is your value at risk for a given portfolio or position or instrument, it would trigger an amber alert already. So the amber alert may have been defined as, for example, heightened focus or shorter duration limit, or preparation for any activity. Should the amber alert become red, what are the immediate steps, such as liquidation of the position, transfer, or reallocation of resources as appropriate. Now, all these pertain to limits. How about if the decision is to transfer or mitigate? What are the available actions to take for managing market risk? One common approach is hedging. Hedging is entering into another transaction using a different set of financial instruments or tools, such as derivatives, that would cause an offsetting effect, either fully or partially, therefore mitigating your overall levels of risk. Now, hedging always has a cost, and that cost is, apart from trimming down the potential return to be generated because of incurring hedging costs, it also introduces different sets of risk. For example, counterparty credit risk and market risk on the hedging instruments themselves, not just on the hedged item. And we illustrate hedging in this particular approach. Suppose your company has borrowings with another bank denominated in US dollars while you're operating in the Philippines. Therefore, while you do have funding, it's in US dollars and you're exposed to the dollar peso exchange rate. You can exchange it into peso immediately to convert your funding into peso. However, when you pay back the principal along with the periodic coupons, it is denominated in dollars. Therefore, you have financial obligation denominated in US dollars. You are exposed to foreign exchange dollar peso fluctuation rates. Now, in this particular instance, one way for the firm, your firm, would be able to reduce or manage that foreign exchange fluctuation is to enter into a hedge transaction with a hedging or hedger bank. The hedging bank or the provider of the hedge instrument could agree into a 5-year pay dollars, sell peso currency swap, wherein the bank will accept your firm's dollars. In exchange, you will get peso regularly. And then, I'm sorry, baliktad. You will receive dollars, and in exchange, you will have to pay peso to the hedger bank. This way, the dollar inflows that you receive from that swap can then be used to pay back your coupon and interest payments to the other bank, thereby effectively and in substance converting your dollar borrowing into a peso funding. The dollar components gets offset and washed out, leaving only the peso component as your cash outflow. You have an inflow of $1 at the beginning, which is assumed to have been converted into peso as part of the swap. And then periodically you just pay the peso equivalent as agreed upon with the swap, fixing your funding cost in peso terms initially at the beginning. You therefore reduce your foreign exchange risk overall, no, the overall profile. Kasi dito, when we look at this, there's still always a dollar peso exchange rate exposure. But the intention is this part will offset that portion. So if you slice it in two, in isolation, you still have that foreign exchange risk. But in combination, you effectively neutralize your exposure from the borrowing with that of the hedging transaction. Okay, to further illustrate, so remember that the loan is for 5 years, fixed, with a fixed coupon rate, but in dollar terms. So you are exposed to foreign exchange dollar peso conversion. You are bound to pay fixed coupon and principal over the next 5 years, but in dollar terms. Since you're operating in peso, you have a cash flow risk arising from FX, because depending on what would be the spot rate at the time you're going to deliver and pay those commitments, then that would translate into cash flow variability, exposing you to fair value risk. Cash flow risk. Using your dollar peso currency swap, that currency swap gives you dollar inflows because you're going to receive dollars. In exchange, you have to pay in peso terms. In this particular structure, your dollar inflow is used to offset your dollar outflow. You're left with only a peso cash out, converting your funding cost to peso terms, and therefore it reduces or outright transfers the foreign exchange risk to that hedge counterparty. So those are the two most common ways of managing and controlling market risk. You have setting limits, either at the beginning, preventing the bank from even entering into or exposing itself to particular types of market risk. Let's say, for example, the bank does not have a mandate or is not allowed or does not have a license to enter or trade equity securities in the stock exchange, example. So that one is already a way to avoid and control exposure to equity price risk. Another way is to limit the exposure or the sensitivities of in terms of variability, rather the amount of variability that you would allow the bank to have in their records. For monitoring is a bit like measurement, but on a continuous basis. In measurement, you try to understand what tools and how are we going to quantify the amount of market risk. In controlling, we set the threshold that we are willing for that metric to move, and we perform activities such as hedging to see to what extent we can bring that level back into acceptable levels, bring the metric back into acceptable levels. Monitoring is looking at and reperforming the measurement and observing how effective our control actions have become. So in this particular case, we perform and we monitor based on our measurement metrics. And then based on what we have agreed upon, what to do or how to handle breaches in the amber levels, in the red levels, then we have to take action appropriately. Part of the market risk monitoring action is also documenting these reports and escalating them in the appropriate channels. On a day-to-day, usually you can flag them real time. For example, after a trade has transpired and you've seen the intraday report and status, you can then immediately flag the trader. Hey, trader, your limits are actually approaching, your utilization is actually approaching allowable levels. So you didn't have to look at, make appropriate inquiries and expectation of action. When it comes to longer periods of time, like for the day, for the week, or for the month, the reporting flow and escalation is also observed, making sure that the appropriate people, both the front office, middle office leaders, as well as the senior management and the board, are kept aware of the levels of market risk in its books. Another monitoring tool, which is also part of the disclosure requirements for financial reporting, is the calculation of market risk sensitivity analysis for disclosure purposes. This is the same with the sensitivity analysis of recalculation and reperformance, assuming different scenarios like plus 25 or minus 25 basis points for interest rates, or plus minus 25 cents for dollar peso exchange rates. However, in this particular instance, this is more on an annual basis based on accounting books. So it's not as dynamic as what we would expect in risk management practice. Still, it's another way of monitoring market risk. And speaking of monitoring, one of the common practices, especially for foreign banks, is the setting up of product control units that are specifically mandated to monitor market risk levels on a portfolio, desk, and product point of view. And part of the exercise would be the verification of prices on marking to market. So it's called IPV, or independent price verification, wherein the market risk professional drills down on the level on the basis of valuation and looks at the sources of movements. So it's possible that a particular position decreased in value because the base interest rates, which is the policy or market rate, have increased, but the traded credit levels are still the same. Another aspect would be liquidity premia or market spreads that have been incorporated and embedded into the pricing or of valuation. Now, another tool used to monitor market risk is what we call the profit and loss attribution. So this is where you would hear P&L explained, meaning a particular desk or a particular portfolio, its daily P&L is scrutinized to the detail, trying to understand what went in and out and what caused the increase or decrease in value. That's why P&L explain. You have to explain that the increase or decrease in fair value changes day on day is as follows. It's because of changes in base interest rates, because of new trades or amendments or trade transactions or commission, taxes, etc. So medyo ano na siya? It's prevalent for foreign banks because they have economies of scale. They can centralize product control and attribution functions to limited groups, but handling it across various jurisdictions, and also leveraging on information technology and systems. Here, yeah, sorry. Nasulat. Hirap naman. Mahirap pag teki eh. Sorry. Yan. When it comes to profit and loss attribution, you really have to drill down in terms of the layers of explainability of P&L. So, for example, impact of prices, impact of volatilities, correlation, if there are changes to the deal alterations or amendments, impact of interest rates, FX, impact of time decay, impact of new trades, etc. Now, it's not an exact science. As much as possible, we should be able to drill down, but there would always be a portion that will remain unexplained. So the goal of profit attribution is to reduce that unexplained portion down to a very low amount, a low negligible amount. Because on a day-to-day basis, dapat you can always explain that the traders acted this way. And this is the effect of their activities, both their actions and inactions. Question, ba't hindi na lang sila traders na magpaliwanag? Ba't ako pang gagawa niyan? Total, sila naman ang nag-action yan eh. So, bakit ako pang mag-e-effort intindihin yung pinagagawa nila at magpaliwanag ng kanilang P&L? The answer there is pretty obvious because the traders, apart from being already burdened with generating amount of returns and balancing that with the amount of risk take in, they have kumbaga self-reporting conflict of interest. In practice, what we do, especially for profit and loss attribution, is we prepare the report and then provide it to the traders. Traders, this is how we interpreted the results for the day. We saw that you took action by buying bonds because interest rates went down, as shown in the portfolio movements. And we saw that you have generated X amount of returns arising from sale transactions, etc. So the trader can dispute, but usually they would acknowledge it. Acknowledge or noted, because this daily P&L explained would be used to then be reported to the, let's say, ALCO, the Asset Liability Committee, on a weekly basis. During the week, the unexplained portion is negligible and therefore everything has been well accounted for. Yun. Medyo overkill siya, especially for simpler, smaller banks. But this tool actually, this monitoring approach is beneficial for those larger organizations where the market risk, the size of the market risk in their books are sizable and could have a material adverse effect if left unmanaged. So nakakatakot niyan kung malaking portion is unexplained. Hindi mo alam saan nangagaling yung gain or loss. So that's an indicator that you don't have enough visibility and appreciation of the exposure being generated by that debts. Okay. I'll try to simplify the illustration of profit attribution as follows. Suppose that after post T+0, post deal date, after one transaction or a 1 day, there is a fair value gain of 100, or the overall P&L rather of 100. When we do profit attribution, we break this down and split it. Let's say, for example, 110 came from interest rate differential, meaning it generated positive value because it could have captured interest rates at a higher yield versus the current prevailing market. Additional 10 for, let's say, time value, because we still have a lot of time in generating additional returns, and accordingly that is factored in as additional value, offset by credit valuation adjustment, or CVA. CVA is your metric to factor in traded credit risk, meaning the ability of this counterparty to generate or the ability of this counterparty rather to fulfill their obligation. Suppose this is a derivative instrument, a forward or swap. The CVA is your quantification of what if that counterparty fails their side of that contract. Now, the total of that is 100. Suppose T+2, from 100, the fair value charge or the fair value becomes 85. So there is a loss of 15, or a change in fair value downward by 15. Under profit, if we do profit and loss attribution, could be split by a decrease in interest rate margins, resulting in lower fair value due to interest rates. So there's a negative 20 from IR differential. Could be because the time value increased. There's while the interest rate differential decreased at the moment, still there's still a wider space and time for that to recover and eventually generate value over time. So it could be a plus 10 coming from time. But then, because of certain factors that led to the credit weakness in that counterparty, the CVA could have increased by a negative 5. So that could explain that your negative 15 mo between T+1 and T+2 is because of negative 20 in lower interest due to interest rate differential, negative 5 in credit in credit valuation adjustments, and positive 10 from time effect. So that's how profit attribution is done in simple terms. In practice, medyo mas malala pa yan. mas technical in nature. And also the use of system is the system having that attribution done by the system helps to simplify and explain things further. Any questions so far about controlling and monitoring market risk? Okay, if none, that's how we manage market risk. We identify, we measure, we control, and we monitor. The next would be the key areas. What are the key areas to focus on in managing market risk? But before we proceed, let's have a 10-minute break because this is the final section of the discussion. So let's pause so that we can take the time to recharge. Okay, thank you very much. So we are at the last part of our session in this gloomy Friday afternoon. And before we took a break, there was a question. In setting limits, is there an ideal level of target gains versus budgeted level of position? Example, target gains should be 1% of budget position, etc. Okay. Limits setting in general, whether are usually skewed towards preventing losses. Now, when it comes to gains, it's usually it would be, I wouldn't say there is an ideal level because at the end of the day, it's in the judgment of the risk taker. In our case, the trader. Because it's possible that they are foreseeing a gain in the position of more than 1%, more than 5%, or more than 10%. It's not for us to determine. However, as market risk professionals, and even in my experience, it's also worth asking. Let's say for example, a trading position which is supposed to be churned within 30 to 90 days has been outstanding for, let's say, 120 days or 150 days. So, pwede mong tanongin, oy, trader, bakit hindi mo pa ito binibenta? If, for example, sabihin ng trader, naka-unrealized loss yan, hindi naman natitrigger yung stop loss. So, ba't ko i-realize yan? There's no urgent need for me to convert it into cash at the moment. Pwedeng ganon. Pinaprotektahan niya yung loss levels niya. So, he doesn't want to realize it. What if kung gain, no? More than 120 days na siyang outstanding, tapos unrealized gain naman. So, pwede mo rin tanungin, trader, bakit di mo to binibenta? Gain naman. Why not realize the gain now? We are at risk of losing out on the realized gains if we don't sell it. So, pwedeng, papaliwanagan mo si trader. Papaliwanagin mo si trader. Sabihin ni trader, actually, it's we still foresee market rates to move in our favor. So, there's no other alternative at the moment. If I cash it out, wala rin ako paglalagyan ng pera. So, ibabalik ko lang din dyan. So, might as well keep it there in the meantime. But as market professionals, you now have an idea. Okay, I flagged you when you should have already. Our expectation is that this have already churned, but you're already beyond the threshold of 90 days for a trading position. In threshold din arbitrary yun. Kumbaga, you can set it internally. But usually si BSP, in my experience, pag nag-examination sila, tinatanong nila yun, market risk, bakit hindi mo to challenge? Bakit yung isang portfolio ang tagal-tagal na outstanding sa trading books? Yung banking books naman ni BSM or ni ALM, hindi mo pwedeng siyempre puwersahin na, uy, benta mo yan, sayang yung mark-to-market gain. Or pwedeng meron silang cut loss limit that they can trim down their position. Pero market gains, usually, it still invites increased scrutiny in terms of trying to understand why are we not moving this portfolio or not capturing the gain or loss. Again, for accounting purposes naman, you have to look at the business model documentation on what would be the trigger points on if and when we need to sell a particular position. Okay. So I hope you were able, I was able to provide some clarity with the question. At the end of the day, ano yan eh, that's the trader's call. Market risk, police tayo eh. So yun ang, sila yung, they're the ones pushing the chips for the table, and our goal, our role is to understand and flag na, hey, I think what you're doing is risky. It's beyond our risk appetite levels, etc., etc. But to have a hard threshold of, oh, your gains are already way past 1%, 5%, or 10%, hindi natin ano yan. I don't think it's prudent to force it upon the trader. Probably a monitoring threshold, pwede. Yun nga, inquiry, at least we understand. Kasi ang nangyayari naman yan, I have an experience when I was a controller in one of the local banks. First 2 months, gigain. So, nagtuwa yung treasury head. Na-report niya sa board. For the months of January and February, we have generated X amount of unrealized gains from our treasury activities. The following March board. Remember those gains we accumulated in January and February? All gone now. Kasi bumaliktad no March. So, kumbaga, hindi mo rin sila mafo-fault because at the end of the day, they're measured in their overall performance on a period basis. Another example that I saw is in 2006, when there was a time when the first 7 months interest rates were creeping up, and then all of a sudden from the month of July, from the month of August all the way to December, bumagsak yung interest rates. So kitang-kita siya sa So the way the interest rate curve was forming over time. And then what we made in terms of our analysis, we saw that, the trading gains were made in the last quarter of the year when interest rates were going down. And part of our market risk evaluation there is that, okay, so ang lalaki ng trading gains sila at that time. That it was explainable that their behavior is because they foresaw interest rates are creeping up, and at some point it will go down and go down significantly. And interest rates are going down, fair value of bonds go up, and then you can unload those bonds to capture fair value realized gains. Yun. Okay, so another question. Is it safe to say that a business model assessment may be used to make justification in choosing the classification of a certain security prior to its purchase? Okay. Thank you for that question. The answer to that is ganito. Business model assessment is an accounting question. Okay. Its principal use is to guide the bank on how to classify a financial instrument that has passed the SPPI test, or the solely payments of principal and interest question. Now, to make justification in choosing classification, the answer is yes. For example, si BSM bumili ng 25-year retail treasury bonds. So, retail treasury bonds, papasa ng SPPI test yan. Pagpasa niya ng SPPI test, ang next question mo is, bakit mo binili yan? For what purpose? Sasabihin ni BSM, it's for HQLA, liquidity management purposes. The business model is that we will hold this until it matures unless we need to sell them to raise liquidity. That's the business model. So, with that in mind, you can use that business model definition and assessment to gauge na, okay, this instrument that was acquired is for this purpose. Now, our role as market risk professionals is to challenge those assumptions, challenge those decisions. In practice, operationally, bago pa mabili yung security, nasagot na yung mga tanong na yan. Now, part of our role is to check, nasusunod ba yung proseso? Tama ba yung binili mo nga, RTB nga, nasa HQLA books mo ba talaga yan? So, yun yung value add natin as market risk professionals because when BMAs are done, business model assessments are done, usually you set the policy first. Market risk is involved in the setting of parameters. Market risk department. Kasi the BMA documentation would also include the limits and other risk parameters. How performance is measured, how the returns are compared relative to the risk, etc. And thank you very much for that question. Okay. So, again, please, if you have any other questions that you have about market risk, do let us know so that we can also discuss about it in this session. We're done discussing why we need to manage market risk. So obviously, as a bank, it's part of what we assume on a day-to-day basis, given that we're dealing with cash inflows and outflows on a regular basis. We've discussed the steps on risk management, identifying, measuring, controlling, and monitoring. Now we go into key areas of focus that we need to be cognizant about when it comes to market risk management. Now, when you look at Appendix 70 of the MORB, which is the Market Risk Management Guidelines, scattered all around it, ang wordings of BSP expects, the central bank, the Bangko Sentral would look into the BSP, would expect the bank to ganyan. So, we could have summarized all of that and listed in bullet points, but I don't think you would remember everything. So, and I would recommend that you print out that Appendix 70 and read it bago matulog. Sarap ang patulog yung mga ganyan. Mahirap nga lang pag mapanaginipan mo na naginip ka, tao dito, nasa panaginip mo na yung mga problema ng bangko niya. Mahirap yun. But in terms of summarizing and highlighting ano yung ini-expect ni Bangko Sentral from market risk of a bank, we can summarize it in 3 words. 1, the market risk policies, guidelines, processes, procedures, controls, behavior, activities, transactions must be relevant. When we say relevant to the nature of business of the bank, its selected market, its size, its capabilities, competencies, and its overall operating model. When we place, let's say, a value at risk, variance covariance measurement tool, it must be relevant to the position we're trying to measure. Kasi kung hindi naman kung kaya namang ma-address ng net open position or ng sensitivity analysis yung market risk, then we could have used that. There's no one stopping us from performing using Monte Carlo simulation for value at risk for FX position or for government securities position. Yun lang, we just have to be cognizant that this can be explained. This is relevant to what the bank is doing when it comes to market risk and achieving its corporate targets. So yun, tatanungin ni Central Bank yan relevant ba tong pinaglalagay nyo sa market risk manual? Ginagawa nyo ba talaga ito? Naiintindihan ba ng mga taong gumagawa ito? Do they have an appreciation of the market risk involved? Does the board see those reports every now and then? Do the board members, senior management have a strong enough understanding to take appropriate actions on those market risk reports? Relevant. The next, expectation proportional. If the bank is a huge bank having exposure or market risk exposure greater than certain other banks, then they also expect that the investments and resources placed to manage those risks are proportionate. So, yung mga market risk limits na pinaglalagay natin, they're not too conservative as to limit the bank's capability to generate returns. They're not too aggressive as to let loose and expose the bank to higher unacceptable levels of risk. Similarly, for capital purposes, the central bank would expect that the bank acts in accordance to the amount of money it is able and willing to lose. Finally, the most important, documented. Scattered across Appendix 70, you would see there appropriately documented, reviewed, recorded, both the policies, the decisions, model assumptions, etc. It should be documented. When I was in SGB, part of one of the audit mantra that I carry to this day is, if it's not documented, it's not done. If it's not documented, it's not done. If the trader says, I know, I did the research on the market factors and I have a strong feeling that market rates will move in our direction. Do you have documentation on your analysis research? Ito siya papel. Ito scratch paper. Okay. Then you look at his or her past performance. Mukha namang, hindi lang talaga siya masinop mag-document, pero mukha naman siyang, based on past performance, mukha naman okay. Nga lang, pagdating sa atin naman at market risk, if, for example, daily P&L ang ginagawa mo, P&L explain. Requirement for us is to keep records of those daily reports. So when I was in one of the foreign banks, wala kaming we converted to paperless. That was in 2017. No. 2015. 15-16. Yan. Wala pang COVID noon. Wala pang pandemic. But we were able to successfully convert all our reports from paper-based to paperless. And all our documentations are either via email or SharePoint or any other secured web portals. And whenever we are asked, okay, where is your documentation during the past 30 days wherein market rates were volatile? So, papakita namin, this was our email, acknowledged ng trader yan, explained yan, we were able to escalate. When market risk limits were breached, it was reported appropriately to the market risk committee or the ALCO, the treasury head acknowledged and did certain actions, etc., etc. Yun. Our documentation stood on its own and helped us simplify our work by not having to recall everything, and also just showing here's our work. You can check it independently. Similarly, examiners and auditors would look at documentation and see that we perform as expected and as effectively as we can. Yun. The central bank would look at relevance, proportionality, and documentation. So when you're setting up your market risk practices and policies, remember to have these documented, and that the documentation shows that all the decisions made are relevant and proportional. Okay, let's talk about risk management governance. And the Institute of Internal Auditors have shared a 3 lines of defense model, wherein the overall governing body is the one ultimately accountable to risk management, including market risk. So those charged with corporate governance, they are expected to take full responsibility and accountability towards the decisions and the results of those decisions. Then they delegate the day-to-day decision making and recommending authority to management. And these are the ones who craft the specific actions to implement the decisions made by the board or the governing body. And then they report and provide updates in terms of as part of their transparency commitments. Now, management is also the one who overseeing the risk-taking units, your first line roles or first line of defense. Those units that are principally generating business activities and their accompanying risks, including market risk. So for treasury-related functions, ito yung mga desks. The desks are the one principally making decisions in terms of placement of funds and acceptance of market risk, etc. You have your second line roles or second line of defense. They're more into evaluation and recommendation in terms of areas wherein the first line roles may not be seeing because of the amount of effort or focus being done. So your first line roles mo yun yung risk-taking units, the front office. Yung operations people are also first line units because they are the ones implementing at the back end. Yung second line roles mo, ito yung risk management group, compliance, sila yung second line people that are not directly involved in the transaction level processing. They see overall position of the bank in terms of their level of compliance and risk management. And they also provide advice as to the potential impact of certain actions by the bank. But they don't necessarily make the final decision when it comes to the transactions and activities. That those are rests with the first line roles. Then you have internal audit. Internal audit is a third line of defense role that provides enough segregation from the day-to-day job and even from the risk management and compliance roles to have an objective perspective as to how things should be run on the ground. And they report directly to the governing body, could be the board of directors or the audit committee. And the audit committee then provides guidelines on expectations, the audit plan, and any areas they would want to have to place more focus on. So the third line, they coordinate with the first and second lines of defense during examination, and they provide value add through identifying areas of improvements, control weaknesses, and other aspects from an independent and objective point of view. This is separate from the external assurance providers, such as your external auditors, who comes in on an annual basis and has different sets of priorities. So, example yan, SGV. External auditors will have focus on financial reporting processes and controls. They may have an opinion on business-related controls and risk management controls. However, their primary focus is making sure that the audit opinion that they're issuing as with regards to reasonableness of the financial reports, all the aspects impacting that have been considered. Anything that they have observed as with regards to business or risk management, including market risk, is only secondary in their priority. Still, they still provide that level of assurance and an additional independent sets or pairs of eyes to look into the operations and provide comment as may be appropriate. Si Central Bank Examiner is also part of the external assurance providers, although iba naman yung assurance na binibigay niya. Hindi assurance sa may-ari, kundi assurance sa depositors. That, signing off and saying that this particular period, the bank CAMELS ratings, or ano ba yung term ngayon? Hindi na CAMELS eh. The bank quality rating is this level, meaning that they have reasonably met the high quality standards of sound banking practices. To drill down further into governance aspect, we look into how treasury activities are managed within the bank. So we have the board of directors up top. They are the overall overall accountable unit charged with corporate governance. And it is, they delegate the day-to-day decision-making aspects to senior management. And then within senior management, we have the asset liability committee that meets regularly, usually weekly, to make decisions impacting the direction of the bank when it comes to deployment of assets and sourcing of funds. Then within the treasury unit, you have your front office, the risk-taking units, you have your back office and middle office. Si ALCO, si Asset Liability Committee, are comprised of senior management officials, usually chaired by the CEO or president. Then you have members from a treasury unit, business units such as your asset generating and deposit taking units. Then you have representatives from finance or controllership to serve as the ang referee niyan yung presidente. Mag-aaway-away yung deposit taking tsaka yung lending. Yung lending gusto mababang rate. Yung deposit taking gusto mataas na rate. Si treasury naman, siya yung nasa gitna. I'll pass it, I can do something about the difference, sourcing it from the market, but at the end of the day, I cannot guarantee that lending can have a low rate and deposit can have a high rate. Si finance, siya lang yung taga-compute. So, pag nag-decide ng, yung FTP natin, gantong level, ganito yung impact natin sa libro natin. Yun. And market risk decisions are likewise included there every now and then, unless a bank has its own market risk committee or treasury committee. But usually it's delegated to the treasurer or treasury head on how best to decide given the dynamic nature of markets. The ALCO would have bank-wide guidelines, so including market risk limits and any hedging transaction, if necessary, that will require higher levels of approval. Pero kung yung day-to-day hedging approach, pwede namang si trader lang yan kung pasok sa kanyang desk limits. Si front office, napag-usapan na natin yan, comprised of your trading, BSM or ALM, and your sales and distribution units. Si middle office, dyan yung risk management group, compliance, and even product control for certain institutions. They sit outside of front office, but close enough to see their day-to-day activities and recommend or advise certain actions, especially if the limits are being breached. Your back office naman adds an additional layer of control by performing the settlement, confirmation, and reconciliation activities. So si front office will initiate deal capture, but then all the rest will be verified, processed, and checked by your back office. Si middle office naman, sila risk management, they would oversee both sides and see, okay, and advise on market, credit, and operational risk, among others. The market risk policies, processes, and controls does not exist in an island. Instead, the overall structure of the way market risk is managed within the bank, within an organization, is also influenced by the overall culture and control environment of the bank. If, for example, it's a foreign bank, in my experience, there are a lot more rules and guidelines, a lot more details and closer supervision and scrutiny involved when it comes to market risk. Pagdating sa local banks naman, or a universal or commercial bank, it's a bit more relaxed in the sense that since it's the domestic market, primary market mo, minsan focus siya doon, with some banks having international investment exposure here every now and then. For simpler banks such as thrift banks, the market risk would also likewise be expected to be a lot simpler compared to commercial banks. But it doesn't mean that they don't have the same issues or concerns. It's just that, again, we go back to the proportionate and relevant focus of or expectation of the central bank from these financial institutions. The control environment surrounding the entire bank would also have an influence on the amount and degree of market risk management policies and controls. Here as well, it's important that communication is, especially for market risk, is fluid and efficient, because the changes in market could be abrupt and it could be quick. So our response time likewise must be diligent. Kumbaga, mabilis tayong mag-react on certain events and activities. Ang kawawa niyan, may mga certain banks that have exposures to Western markets. So, gabi na dito sa Pilipinas, kakabukas lang ng London market or New York market, kailangan nakabantay ka pa rin. Kasi, for example, certain treasury transactions are impacted by what's happening in other markets. So, kasama yun sa trabaho. Nung time ko doon sa isang foreign bank, medyo manual doon yung updating ng board rates for foreign exchange. So, on a weekday, we update the board rates 3 times a day. Morning at open, lunchtime, and before closing. So, part of mark to market. Pagdating ko ng weekends, nakabantay pa din. Kasi, if the Friday night natin, Friday morning ng US, Saturday morning natin, Friday night ng US, si Friday night nagsara, na volatile at napakalayo na ng board rates, tatawag na si Treasury front office. Mr. Jobs, Saturday morning, dati nagbumabiyahe pa akong Baguio, papuntang Baguio nung sarado pang T-Plex no, wala pang T-Plex tsaka EasyTex noon. Ilang lang bukas. Tatawag yan. Jobs, we need to update the board rates now. Otherwise, any transaction executed by branch banking is off market. So, yun. On weekends, nagbabantay pa rin ako ng interest rates. So, it added to the stress of the work, but it's part of the work nonetheless. That was the time hindi pa kami masyadong automated doon. I think right now automated na. So, that already addressed that. But it doesn't mean that the bank market risk departments hindi nila kailangan bantayan yung mga ganung aspects. Kasi it's part of the operations of the bank. This one is just a depiction of flow of information within the market risk framework of a bank. We see that the primary source of reference data would be your trading or treasury front systems. The pricing libraries are defined based on the nature of business and agreement. Market data is likewise defined and sourced independently. So, di mo pwedeng tanungin si treasury trader, pahinga ako ng Bloomberg Bibal rates na ilo-load ko sa system. Hindi pwedeng ganun. Kasi mabibreach yung independence ng sourcing mo. The trades come from your front office transactions. And all this information are captured in the risk engine. And the risk engine spews out matrices ranging from P&L attribution. Yun. End of day P&L. You have intraday information, value at risk measurement, and even stress testing information if the system allows it. So ideally, ganyan ang setup. No? I say ideally kasi in practice, and as I've seen in my experience, hindi lahat ganyan. Even in the foreign banks that I worked for, meron pa rin kami doon, Excel-based pa rin kami. It's not yet full integrated. And it's also for local banks, I could also imagine. Especially if the treasury system is either in-house. Pag in-house kasi at updated naman yung system ng treasury, okay pa. Pero kung black box vendor provided yan, sana kasama yung market risk module. Kung hindi, sa labas mo gagawin. So, challenging yan. That's another consideration that needs focus on the infrastructure and setup that the bank has when it comes to sharing of information. One other important aspect is model governance. When I say model governance, part of market risk is because risk management talks about in the present, looking forward into the future, anticipating a variety of possible scenarios and making a decision and action out of it. And projecting what may happen in the future requires having a model to aid you in quantifying and drawing a more objective picture of what that future would look like. And part of any model setup, you have your inputs, your process, and the output would be your financial and risk reports. And those risk reports are used to calibrate and compare versus actual. You perform back testing, and the feedback gets back into the inputs. And usually, kahit din sa process, you tweak the process, you tweak the assumptions and the model algorithm every now and then based on those outputs. But when it comes to model review, validation, and back testing, there are 5 areas that we need to have emphasize on. One is governance and review. Who owns the model? Who is responsible reviewing it? Are the models owned by Treasury, by market risk? If the market risk is the owner of the market risk models, who is in charge of validating it? Is it from internal audit, external audit? Is it from finance? Is it from operational risk? So how often do we need to review the entire process? What are the policies and procedures in place to document the critical aspects of model governance? Another area is the specific methodologies, assumptions, and the model's technical specifications. So, yan yung meat of the model validation process. Although the validation process would put equal emphasis on controls, governance, etc. Still, when you're trying to understand whether the car works, it is the engine that you would like to understand. How the engine works, what makes it run, what are the inputs, what are the assumptions made, how reasonable are those assumptions, and what other steps or formulas have been incorporated, and do they make sense compared to the standards, compared to market practice, etc. Part of model evaluation is the data flow and quality. What are the processes involved in gathering data, testing those data in terms of their fit and quality, their storage, how are they kept, is information security observed, and who owns or who is responsible in providing those inputs and data. Part of the model evaluation as well is the model governance is the security and control. What are the control aspects, segregation of incompatible duties observed? What are the roles and responsibilities of other members apart from the market risk analyst? What is the review process? How frequent are the outputs being reviewed? What are the process change management controls being in place? How does model refinements being implemented? Who reviews and approves them? Inputs, how are they vetted, and how are they fed and managed after use, etc. Finally, the report themselves, the output. Someone has to look at whether the output is still relevant. Does anyone use the output? Are we able to get as much value vis-a-vis the amount of investment made to have this model used overall? Now, in my experience in market risk management, ideally, marami kang software and system, but in practice, hindi mo maiiwasan gumamit ng Microsoft Excel. Kasi Excel, madali mo ipaliwanag sa sarili mo, lalo pag ikaw bumuo ng models. Madali mo siya mapapaliwanag sa sarili mo, pero ang problem, hindi siya standard. And it's susceptible to errors, corruption, and alterations, especially if you're sharing the file with others. Now, although I wasn't able to include it here, one mitigating control that we did is to institute end user computing standards, or EUC standards, wherein we do recognize the need to use basic spreadsheets and other non-core system software or methodology or tools, but we do place a set of standards. For example, there is, pag Microsoft Excel ang gamit mo, meron kang tab showing the maker or change log. Meron kang readme tab that explains how the model works. Meron kang validation tab wherein if, for example, a wrong figure was entered, magfa-flag siya, or merong hindi balance dun sa market risk model mo. Your Excel formula has validation checks built in. For example, numeric lang ang pwedeng encode. Pinasok mo alpha, so i-reject niya yun. Yung mga ganun, we cannot avoid not using Excel, but what we can do to improve our way of managing market risk and avoiding operational risk arising from managing market risk is to institute standards of control, such as the end user computing standards. There was one experience I had in one local bank wherein our market risk, actually regulatory to submission siya of liquidity position on a daily basis. So for the longest time, for how many weeks, papansin namin, ba't hindi gumagalaw yung market risk position, yung liquidity risk position natin? Ganun pa rin yung level. Pagtingin namin, dun sa loob ng Excel file, naka-hard code, dapat naka-formula. Hindi namin na-update yung formula. So, nagot, patay. 3 linggong report sa sinabit kay BSP. So, kala ng boss ko machuchugi siya sa trabaho niya. Kasi nung in-update yung formula, below limits na pala ng liquidity levels. So, buti, nakita before mag-month end. Siyempre, katakot-takot na paliwanag ang ginawa kay BSP, katakot-takot na promises of improvement, which we followed through. Ang masakit lang talaga doon is, wala Excel lang pagagamit namin right now. If you buy a software, it's not easy to implement. It's such a big bank. Local bank, hindi naman ganun kabilis mag-implement ng new project. So, ang dami-dami dadaanan. Kaya hingi ka pa budget, justify pa yung budget, papaliwanag mo pa yung project roadmap, etc. Involve mo pa other people bago mo pa ma-implement yun. So, ang reporting kay BSP nun daily. So, we have to work with what we have. Ganun din sa market risk that it cannot be avoided that we have to work with tools that are not ideal. What is important is what we do to manage the inherent risk of using such methodologies or tools. Okay, we talked about backtesting. Backtesting is simply using your actual results, comparing it to your forecasted, and assessing. Of course, it's not perfect that you will match 1:1, but assessing the degree of predictability of your model. And that's the purpose of backtesting, is to simply test how predictable the model is. Now, stress testing is not just to test the model themselves, but even the bank's capabilities in general, and its market risk management capabilities in particular. Pagdating po sa business as usual, we look at your regular volatility. You can end up in levels that are still acceptable for market risk management purposes. A stress test, on the other hand, pushes the boundaries of those metrics far above or beyond business as usual to know to what extent can our market risk management tools work, to what extent can we absorb, or to what extent our capacity can take it when it comes to a stressed environment. Stress testing helps us to understand the extent or the limits that the bank can take. I'm not saying you set that as your market risk limit. Rather, it's to help you visualize to what extent the bank can absorb such a stressful scenario. It requires the bank to create multiple plausible scenarios that are stressed in nature, meaning not normal, not you don't expect to happen very often, but are still possible enough. One question that I saw in the market is that yung nangyaring increase in policy rates because of inflation, isn't that a stress scenario already? The answer is yes, actually. No. While inflation is business as usual, the abrupt rise of inflation as a result of post-pandemic behavior, again, the pandemic itself is a black swan event already. Kumbaga, everyone was expecting slow recovery and low activity. Nga lang, they were not able to time it properly as to kailan siya babalik. Gaano ka abrupt. Plus, nagkaroon pa ng Ukraine invasion, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that had impact on oil prices coupled with the supply chain issues. So, nagsanga-sanga siya, nagkabit-kabit, that caused inflation, the global inflation to go up. And the policy setters had a tough time catching up, resulting to increases in interest rates to higher than expected or anticipated levels. Still, your stress testing should have anticipated this. What if from 25 basis points, what if 50 bips? What if 75, 100, 125, 200 in one shot? That's your stress testing. Kasi it would show that the bank could break or treasury limits could break. But the question, again, risk management in the present, looking forward in the future, what would happen? You want to prepare yourself and make certain decisions. Right now, that would prepare you to what will happen if and when those scenarios turn out to become reality. Now, one other aspect that the central bank is also curious about is what the banks are doing when it comes to reverse stress testing. Stress testing is, let's push the market variables to something further down the extreme and see what the metrics would look like. Reverse stress testing is, what if our metrics is already at the boundary or, beyond the boundary? What market factor or factors would cause that event? So reverse stress testing is, okay, if the bank's capital is at 12% relative to their capital adequacy ratio, what is that scenario that would push that ratio down to 9%? What is the 3%? What scenario would generate a 3% reduction in capital ratio or a 300 basis points reduction in capital ratio? In market risk, ganun din. So if you have a portfolio of fixed income securities, alam mo na kung ano yung market risk limit mo, anong isip, you can simulate already. It could result in an observed number, let's say, 4,000 basis points increase from 5% magiging 40%, example. Ganyan lang, example lang. Still, for a fact, okay, we still have a big room compared to breaking the limits or the bank's risk capacity. That is reverse stress testing. Okay. Final area that we need to be made aware of is capital adequacy. When we look at how the balance sheet is structured, we have your assets on the left side, liabilities and equity on the right side. This is based on accounting point of view, wherein the rules used to prepare the figures is IFRS or International Financial Reporting Standards. When it comes to regulatory, the definitions somewhat become different and is skewed towards what the regulators are putting more focus and priority on. And pagdating sa capital adequacy, ang computation mo ng capital is based on prudential rules. And here, rather than looking at accounting equity, we're looking at regulatory qualifying capital versus the risk weight assets. So here kasi, accounting, ang definition mo niyan is based on IFRS. So pwedeng fair value, amortized cost. Okay. Tsaka net book value, sorry. Net book value. Ganyan na itsura sa accounting. Pagdating mo sa regulatory for capital adequacy purposes, yung risk weights mo would depend on certain parameters. Kung gumagamit ka ba ng standard definition or standard approach or internal models approach. Ganon din kay market risk. Are you using standard approach or market internal models approach? Another perspective is economic. So, which is driven by ICAAP, Internal Capital Adequacy and Assessment, Internal Capital Adequacy Assessment Process. It's partly regulations driven, but the central bank or the prudential rules expect that the bank would use its own definition when it comes to economic capital. So, Pillar 1 risks are captured as well as Pillar 2 and other risks and consideration in exchange for defining what the economic capital is. For market risk purposes, ang focus natin is itong portion na to, tsaka ito. Kasi, this one is driven by accounting rules. So, medyo, we can also decide on it, especially if it will impact your accounting P&L. But for capital adequacy, the focus is on prudential rules when it comes to market risk, risk-weighted assets, and economic capital when it comes to ICAAP. So at the moment, under the prevailing Basel 2.5, we have two approaches. Standardized approach, which is most local banks are following. We have internal model approach, which some foreign banks are likewise practicing, either VaR plus stressed VaR or incremental risk charge. But in the coming years, once the fundamental review of the trading book approach is finalized, then the calculation of market risk capital charge would be changed. So yung standardized approach niya will use both sensitivity-based and the default risk charge with add-on residual risk. Whereas the internal model approach would look at expected shortfall coupled with a default risk charge and non-risk factors. Tapos may other charges ka pa that you have to consider. Yun. So, the current practice will eventually change depending on the speed of adoption of the Bangko Sentral. But us as market risk professionals, we have to prepare, anticipate for these possible changes so that by the time they happen, we are more than prepared or equipped to handle those changes and questions. Okay, that's about it when it comes to market risk management. If you have any questions, please take this opportunity now to raise them so that we can discuss them. And any questions as it pertains to the topics covered, market risk in general, or risk management, any questions in that regard? Oh, wala na magtatanong? Ako magtatanong. Multiple choice answer. Pang FRM question. Wait lang. Labas na. Joke lang. Okay. Market risk is one of the main causes of concern when it comes to running a bank. Of course, credit risk would always be the dominant area of focus. However, market risk has shown that if it's left unmanaged or mismanaged, it could cause catastrophic losses to the bank. And it's very when you look at the reality, no, in risk management in the banks. So si market risk isa sa mga less kumbaga kulang sa manpower. Not because there are a lot less market professionals available, but simply because kasi risk management like finance is viewed as a cost center. And it's a sad reality that those decision makers don't see the fact that if market risks are not managed well, if they just rely on the goodness and skills of their traders, the cost they saved versus that additional hire to beef up the market risk capabilities of the units, or not investing enough in market risk software or IT, the losses that could result could have been avoided. The cost would have been far lower than the losses. Although right now, benefit of hindsight, not a lot of people would realize that. May question dito. Can you give an overview of the internal models under fundamental review of the trading books? Yung expected shortfall approach, to be quite honest, hindi ko pa siya naaaral ng masinsinan. Kasama yan sa assignment ko. Kasi si Sir Roy Laksamana is one of my mentor and friend. Si Sir Roy always reminds me, oh, you should study FRTB, internal model expected shortfall approaches because it will become the future of market risk management. So, sige po. I will. So, right now, I don't have, I won't be able to have a usable explanation on the expected shortfall. I tried studying it because it's more on the statistical nature, more on the tail risk, tail aspects of market, at least a value at risk. But beyond that, medyo hindi ko na siya gamay. So let me get back to you on that one. So probably in the next iteration of this course, we'll have expanded versions of that. Thank you for that question. I'll keep that in mind. When I prepared for the program, so I look back at my GARP FRM or Financial Risk Manager materials. When you look at market risk management, diretso siya sa measurement. Oh, value at risk, incremental VaR, discretionary VaR, incremental, tsaka additional VaR, yung mga ganon. One instrument or one factor value at risk, multi-factor value at risk, diversified or portfolio market value at risk. And it's fine. Part of our role as market risk professionals is to perform measurements. But there are a lot of books out there that can teach us better about market risk measurement, more than what I can share with you. And I cannot teach it, even if may 5 days tayo. I think the best way to learn about market risk measurement is practice. Practice, hindi lang practice mag-isa, kundi the actual application of it. Medyo risky siya, especially if you don't understand it. Nga lang, ano siya, kumbaga, it's when you deal with it on a day-to-day basis, it becomes a learning process. Ganun yung experience ko because coming from an audit background. Tapos bigla akong naging market risk product control dun sa isang foreign bank. So I do understand value at risk on a theoretical level. Pero nung nakita ko na siya in practice, okay, ganito lang pala ginagawa. Historical loss simulation, simple lang. Diretso ka agad. So, and not a lot of analysis will be required of me, although I'm cognizant of the limitations of historical loss simulation. Still, it's a worthwhile thing to learn. Okay, may tanong. Why are we still calculating ECL for FVOCI kahit may mark-to-market na siya? Okay. Good question. The philosophy answer is, sabi na accounting standard, mag-compute eh. Pero ang totoo niyan, ganito. Diba? FVPL, fair value changes, go to P&L. No question about that. Amortized cost, wala ka kino-compute na fair value for accounting purposes. So, and since you're going to hold it until collection, you're more susceptible to credit risk. Therefore, you have to capture the expected credit loss. FVOCI is right in the middle. Naka-carry siya at fair value. Pero, sabi ng business model mo, hold to collect yan until I need to sell. Pag hold to collect, credit risk is important. Actually, credit risk is important kahit sa trading. Pero ang primary focus mo, priority mo doon, market risk. Ang priority mo sa amortized cost, credit risk. Ang FVOCI, both market and credit risk, kailangan mong isipin. That's why market risk, naka-fair value siya. Credit risk, kasi hindi mo man yun i-mark to market or i-mark to market mo at hindi mo i-realize yung gain or loss. You still have to weigh in the probability of collection. So the reason why you have to capture ECL for FVOCI, despite the fact that it is being carried at fair value to other comprehensive income or at fair value, is because of the hold to collect portion of the business model. You have to capture that. Sure, markets right now see that its value when it's traded in the secondary market, market risk yun. Pero yung actual collectibility niya, when you wait until its maturity, it may be priced in sa traded credit risk, but ECL is the entity's own estimate of credit risk. The markets may have a diversified point of view on credit worthiness, but ECL for IFRS 9 purposes focuses on your assessment. Kasi business model mo yan eh. Ikaw nag-decide ilagay sa FVOCI yan eh. Pwede na yung security na binili mo sa FVOCI, sa ibang bangko, FVPL. Sa ibang bangko, amortized cost. Ikaw, FVOCI ka. And FVOCI, part of that is waiting until collection. So hopefully I was able to. Hindi kita pinapagalitan. Passionate lang ako dyan, especially IFRS 9. ECL, kaya there's an extra effort involved because the business model dictates that you have to you committed to hold it until collection of or until maturity, unless you need to sell and convert it into cash. That's why you still have to capture ECL for accounting purposes. Sa market risk, dyan papasok si credit valuation adjustment. O kaya yung traded credit, you carve out the credit portion. If you can carve out, no? Yun ang challenge dyan sa market risk models. Madali, if the market dictates, the yield curve, pag tinanggal mo yung, ginawa mo siyang risk-free rates, ito itsura niyan. Ang yield to maturity, ang quotation ng market for bonds, yield to maturity. So, i-convert mo ulit to yield to maturity yung market baseline mo. The difference between the spread between the base market rates and and coupon or market rates of corporates may be predominantly credit spread, pero may liquidity dyan, may other uncertainty that you have to price in, meron pang margins. So, hihimayin mo. Yun lang talaga ang ano dyan. Pero pagdating sa accounting, pag FVOCI, expectation on top of fair value changes going to equity, may ECL provisioning ka. Any other questions po? So thank you, Sir Mark, for those questions. Really appreciate it.
Okay, any more questions from our participants? You may type your questions in the chat box or you may use the raise hand button. And okay, so let's see.